This is The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their backs confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, welcome. Good morning. It's June 5th, and welcome to Connect. It's going to be talking about private property issues. It's going to be talking about the attacks on the farming and ranching communities all over this country. But today we're going to be focusing on a farm in the Pennsylvania area, because I think a lot of folks don't realize that much of the attacks on the lands in the West seem to get all the attention, but we don't realize this is a national problem. This is not a problem of just one particular part of the country. It's a national problem, and it really is part of the attempts to destroy private property and to destroy farming and ranching in a small scale, where, you know, the non-commercial producers. It's an attempt to shut them down and to reduce farming to just pretty much corporate farming, the big guys, and the rest of us will just be serfs, and we'll be living on the land. If we're fortunate enough to be in the country, it will be quite exceptional, and most likely most people will be living in cities, because that's much easier to keep track of us in cities than it is in the country. So today I have Bob Brace. Bob is a gentleman from Pennsylvania. He's been in a battle in the courts for the last 30 years with the federal government over a very, very interesting land issue that has to do with wetlands, and we'll get into that case shortly. We also have on the call Jim Carlson, who is really a consultant for local governments on issues where much of the, let's say, violation of the rules of law, and a lot of these agencies will set their own rules, and then they'll even violate their own rules. And Jim works with local governments to make sure that he points out the pimples that the government, the feds are doing, or, you know, even state government for that matter. And he's going to be on the call to act as maybe an advisor of sorts. And then Chance Gowan from Range Magazine. Chance is going to be on the call, and Chance has got a very interesting history. He's the science editor for Range Magazine and has been for the last 20 years. But he is a wildlife and aquatic biologist and has really about a 30-year background in dealing on wildlife biology and aquatic issues for the federal government. So With that, I'll start the program with Bob Brace. Bob, are you on the call?
Thanks for the info there. It's more than interesting, in my estimation, what's going on, and it has been for all these years. And like you were saying earlier when you started the show, most people don't have a clue, but I have been involved with the property rights issue now for 35 years, ever since it began to be a real issue. But the whole problem is administrative law in my mind. We don't have constitutional law anymore, and when they come out, you can't get legal. But anyway, this whole fight of mine, like I said, it's going on 32 years now. As of May 5th, it's going on 32 years. But this last year, there's been 22 depositions. I think there's 3,200 pages of information on our websites, and Larry's, mine, and farm journals. Chris Bennett done a real good job of doing that blood and dirt. Anyway, those are things that I think are so important that, as Dan has been saying here, if we're going to survive in this country, we got to understand these issues. But anybody have any questions, have at them.
Yeah, well, Bob, we're gonna build the background for this whole thing, because I think it's important that our listeners understand how this whole battle started. And first of all, you took over the family farm in 1975 or 76 from your dad, and it had been in your family for several generations. And you literally bought out the farm at full market value, just to make sure that you did it the right way. And you started out with a lot of projects to make your farm more productive, rebuilding some drainage features that had been built by your granddad and some things like that. And early in this project, you had 100% cooperation by all the state and federal agencies that were involved in, this kind of a land consultation. So would you maybe walk our listeners through the whole early part of this process up until the time that in 87 that the folks came on your land and literally tried to completely shut you down?
All right, as Dan just said, I bought the farm from my dad in 1975, paid full market value for it, $170,000, and I acquired his conservation plan. And I probably the only one in the country that did everything right. But I worked for full 10 years from 75 to 87. But the drainage started in 76, and all with the knowledge of the conservation district, and everyone knew exactly what was going on. Never had a problem. But when they wanted to start making issues here, we had a game commissioner that would ride around with the field officers, and he came out with that one person that day that was trapping beaver that were a problem, and they had been a problem, but they had always worked with us. But that particular day, he came out, and he wanted to know where my permits were, and I told him I shouldn't need any permits. I'm farm exempt and had the exemptions. And he said, I'll see what trouble can be. So with that said, that started the whole problem. So first 7 years, it took me 7 years to go through the first judgment. She gave me clean bill of health, said you're good to go. Will fall within the farm exemption. The Third Circuit a year later come back and said, no, the rule, they didn't use the rule law, didn't use no facts, and said, hey, we're not, well, actually what they said was the pasture's not farming. So that they said the conversion was a new use, and therefore they said I was in violation. So Judge mentioned his decision didn't last very long. So anyway, with that said, then I had come up to a dead end. I had signed a consent decree in 96 to get off of this, what do you want to call it, nightmare that we were having and trying to get resolved. But anyway, I signed a consent decree saying that, that I wouldn't do anything with the property unless it was in compliance with the Clean Water Act. And I had always been in compliance. That was a frustrating thing. But again, the Third Circuit tried to indicate that I had abandoned it because they said I didn't have a crop on it quick enough or whatever. And that's kind of what they've done and they're doing throughout the country today. They got this abandonment or whatever they want to say, how they want to do it. Anyway, that led into a 10-year situation to try to get another court trial. My first attorney, well, was actually my second attorney, worked for 10 years. I finally got another trial in 2005, and it was in Washington, D.C. Judge Allegra. It was a 4-day trial. It was decided the Third Circuit was wrong. They said to put the man's property back. The law changed. So anyway, that took about 11 years later. We're still trying to get it back. Well, 4 years ago now, 13, after they give us permission to start bringing it back, they said, well, they made a mistake. So they come out and they said we had 3 violations. So they put another enforcement action against us. That's pretty much to this date where we're at. And then this last year, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of litigation. The facts are there. We've proven the conspiracy that was there or is there. That kind of brings us up to this date.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's kind of explain to our listeners what this really boiled down to. Was a 30-acre parcel that had been in pasture and I guess grass hay or something, but anyway, it had had an original tile drainage feature on it that would drain it off. It had a small creek going by that particular parcel, and in 1976 you actually checked with USDA, and then you checked with the state of Pennsylvania, and they actually sent out a guy that trapped the beavers that had been building dams on that creek so that you could clean out an old drainage feature that had been on the property for many, many, many years, so that you could actually crop that 30 acres, actually grow row crops on that 30 acres, and have it drained. And I find it interesting because you followed all the rules of the law. You contacted USDA, you contacted Pennsylvania Fish and Game. They actually came out and took the beavers off, and everything was, you had dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, and everything was just fine with them, clear up until that point in 1987 when they decided all of a sudden you were a bad guy. Am I right on all that? Would you kind of walk through that?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as I said earlier there, I mean, we worked for 10 solid years in there with a blessing from everyone, the Fish Commission, Game Commission, and we had a farm exemption. The 72 Clean Water Act, it changed in 77. Senator Muskie, on July 25th, 1977, said there needs to be an exemption for farmers. So there was no problem and no issue with it. But as this environmental movement, the Food Security Act, when the Food Security Act went into place in 1985, the rules changed. And that's when they really wanted to get tough on wetlands and what we were doing. But up until 1985, they encouraged farmers all the time to drain and bring these areas into production. So, you know, it wasn't nothing new in Erie County. That was the way we farm, and it is the way we farm, and we can't farm without good drainage. If you don't have good drainage, you can't get the productivity out of your land, so it's a necessity. But what you said is proper, but there again, that's what I'm saying. When this Clean Water Act came in 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, they were making examples, and that's why it's not an issue here of me in Pennsylvania or someone else in Montana or Wyoming or wherever. I mean, this is a situation going on a long time. Like Vicky Poe's guy, O.C. Mills. We have tapes on our websites. You know, I think there's 10 different clips on there that would bring up all the issues we're talking about, or have been talking about. But, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And then, again, you can't get nowhere because what they did, as I said earlier, they didn't use the rule of law. They didn't use the facts, as Judge Menser determined we had done everything that needed to be done. I am the only one, I believe, in the country that 32.5 acres, 32.5 that have on the consent decree. That became about because that was what a CW, I had a converted wetland. A converted wetland, if you look it up, that is a woody area with brush or one thing or another that's drained, and you had and should have had until 1995 to clear that property and fix it and get it into production. But what they did under the administrative law that I'm talking about, and the Game Commission, the Fish Commission, and the EPA, and everyone else, when they come in there, I mean, it completely destroyed the ability to do anymore, and the beaver backed everything back up, and anyway, it's been a nightmare ever since. But we talk about state and local laws, and I send information out anymore. And since you have administrative law, Chevron difference in 1984, that completely eliminated our constitutional law, and that's why you can get permission at the local level, the state level, and even the federal level. And when the Corps of Engineers or the EPA says, we want to make an example, you're done. I mean, you're in this quagmire. That's what there's 7 agencies, and the first 5 have nothing. I mean, you can have all those permits in place, and it means nothing, and that's what's so frustrating. I testified in Congress on the Fairness to Know Act, and that's what I'm saying. People are given permission to do things, and then they find out that that permission doesn't mean anything. So, Mr. Carlson there, if he's in these kind of situations through local laws and whatever, I mean, that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah, Bob, I have to tell you, that's the reason that Jim is on the call, because he can maybe shed some light on the way some of these administrative agencies function and why there's such a problem right now in our country. And that's also your article, the article Dirt and Blood, or Blood and Dirt, that was written by Farm Journal. I gave that article to both of these gentlemen to read, and then also your website on palandowners.org, so that they could be kind of ready to talk about this during the call. And I have to tell you, both of them indicated, they said, boy, this is just, it's almost book and page, the sort of things that have been going on in the West as well. So this is a countrywide phenomenon, and that's why we're having this on the radio this morning, because it's important that we understand we're all in this pickle together. Rural America is under attack, and the only thing we can do is fight back and stop this craziness from continuing. And Jim Carlson's been working on a lot of programs in that regard. Jim, are you on the call? Jim, are you on the call?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. You must have been on mute. I want, Jim, you've been listening to Mr. Brace and myself in the conversation early into this discussion. We've got a lot to talk about here, but obviously you've encountered the same kind of problems that Bob Brace has been talking about, and that is administrative law ends up pretty much being all the real law, all the legislative law, and they get away with it. And it's not supposed to be that way, is it?
Well, I think first of all, I want to first of all thank Bob for his resolve, his tenacity, and American exceptionalism. I'd like to start with that because it's amazing farmers that stay with this program in the face of expenditures that say this isn't right, and I'm going to dig in on this, and I think that's just so encouraging. With that said, I'll take off on one thing, and then I'll go to the Chevron deference, because we always talk about that. I think we talk about that every time I'm on the program. The one of the things that was said is he followed all the rules of the law, and the real question here is, what is the rule of law? And what we have is just a cluster of laws and administrative laws, and then policy manuals from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and from Environmental Protection Agency, and we have court decisions that affect this. There's a number of court decisions that affect this, and so ultimately what happens is U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has expanded their role from just regulating navigable channels now to attempting to take jurisdiction of all waters of the U.S. And so that's really the problem we have, and then that's obscured by all of these other things, and then they use the court system, and by the way, if they assign you penalties, probably the letters you received, Bob, were from Environmental Protection Agency. Army Corps cannot levy their own permits or their own fines for violation.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it goes back much further. Like you said there, all waters. I think there was a July 1975, July 25th, 1975. There was a court order. The United States government said they owned all water, and that's been an issue ever since. And the problem is, when it falls on top of the mountain, it's going to migrate somewhere, and they say someday it's going to become navigable. So this jurisdictional stuff that we're talking about has been going on for all these years. They have it, and they have had it. I used to carry in my briefcase when I was lobbying in Washington and Harrisburg all the time a letter or an article that says, plowing is a necessity. You're supposed to have a permit. But it's been so long, and these fines are so horrendous, and that's what I said, and I keep saying. I mean, my first enforcement action this year was $100 million plus, $100 million, and never did anything wrong, and all the things I've said or tried to say, they're all evidence now, and that's what I'm saying. In 1993, the EPA, an environmental reporter, if you look on our website, you'll see it specifically talks about Bob Brace. Bob Brace didn't make any difference, so I had an exemption. They can recapture. In this recapture provision, the F1 and F2, it's got so many people in a quagmire, and they can do anywhere they want. And that's why those little clips we have on our website indicates a lot of those things. But so many people think it just went back to Obama, but it hasn't. I'm a prime example of it. Victoria Post guy, O.C. Mills, the Missouri farmers out there that's on our website, and out there in the Gabazes, all those people, the ranchers there in the Roaring Fork. And these are all examples of them thinking they have jurisdiction everywhere. But that's the problem. It's so complex, so intertwined, and 99% of the people don't have a clue. They say, well, that can't be. And that's what is happening. We have that situation, and we have that complacency, and they don't think it's their problem. Well, again, it is their problem because we're destroying our country with it. Because if you or I can't do anything and take 25 or 30 years, it took 25 years to dredge the Oakland Harbor. But it's so complex, again, that's what I'm saying. And you think that you got an okay permit, and it means nothing. That's why when Dan talks about what I had exclusionary property. Up until July 25th, there wasn't anything. I mean, that was all exclusionary property. Then you had Senator Muskie's exemption, 1977, August 4th. Then you had the Food Security Act saying that, if you had a conversion started December 23rd, 85, those are things that are full exemptions or exclusions. And like I said, it turns out, and I'm the only one, I still have the information in my office here because when I had that conversion started, the Kiplinger letter had mentioned I'd better make sure that I have this documented. So I documented, went and I had the CW and the PC. I had that. And then in 88, they had the commenced conversion. I had all that, and I proved all that. That stuff is all on. If you look on our website, their Andy Johnson report, it shows all those things. But again, it's frustrating to think that you can be legal, actually legal, and they can recapture your property. That's what's bad. I have a situation here that I had sent out to, I got 35 or 40 people that I put emails out to, and I put the example on there. There was Arch Coal in Pennsylvania. They had a permit rescinded in 14. They said it's bad precedence. They're doing it all the time. That's why pipelines are shut down and everything else. It's because of the recapture provision in the Clean Water Act. There's not enough talk about that, but Congress is the one that allowed this, and Congress is the only one, to my knowledge, that can straighten it out.
That's right.
But anyway, it's a real issue, and Congress gave them the authority to do this. That's why I try to make that point.
They will. and Dan, let's talk about the deferences, because that's really part of what happened. Is you really have three deferences that contributed to the acceleration of administrative, let's just say, taking jurisdiction. And those deferences are the Chevron deference, the Auer deference, and the Baltimore Gas and Electric deference. And what those deferences did, for example, Baltimore Gas and Electric versus Natural Resource Defense Council, that particular deference allowed, during litigation settings, it allowed courts to grant super or extreme deference to the agency. So now you're in a court setting, sitting across from the government with ultimately deep pockets, and now the Baltimore Gas and Electric deference allows the agency to interpret its own science. In the same way, the Auer deference is the court deference to agency interpretations. Now, in a litigation setting, again, the court will look at the agencies and they'll say, okay, you can interpret your own rules even though you're the one that's being sued, you're the defendant in litigation. And then you have the Chevron deference. And so the point there, Dan, is these three deferences now accelerated and in a sense empowered agencies and woke them up. And then they started making their own administrative rules. Many, over half the rules at the federal level, don't even go through the Administrative Procedures Act process of public comment. And even when they do, often they don't incorporate the comments or make changes. And so now you have agencies who have taken on a legislative function. In environmental EPA's case, and there's other agencies, EPA has an administrative adjudicatory function. They can issue judgments. They have legislative functions, which means they make rules, and then they have an executive function. So now we have autonomous agencies that are autonomous, that have all three functions of the branch of the American government: judicial, executive, and legislative. Now, how do we correct that? And Dan, you know me, I always try and put tools in someone's toolbox, or in the toolbox of Americans. And I think that in Arizona, this legislative session is what we need to do and speaking to Bob's point, is on Wednesday in April 11th, Arizona Senate now, or the Arizona passed a bill, it's House Bill 2238. And what's happening in Arizona now is the state now is doing a Congressional Review Act style administrative function, and they're taking for their state House Bill 2238 for Arizona now, and it was signed by the governor. Now, whenever
Jim, let's hold that thought until we get on the other side of the break, and we'll be on back and pick up where you left off.
This is The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and we've got on our call today Bob Brace, a farmer from Pennsylvania who has had a almost historic, I guess it would be a historic fight to protect his private property rights and to be able to farm. And online with him is Jim Carlson. and Chance Gowan. And Jim is a consultant on local governments and does a lot of work on these various government overreach issues. And Chance Gowan is a science editor for Range Magazine, and he is also a wildlife biologist and an aquatic biologist. And he's done quite a bit of work over the years for the federal government on a lot of these issues. And he understands just exactly where some of the problems lie, and that's why he ended up becoming science editor for Range Magazine. So with that, Jim, I want to get back to give you a chance to finish up your thoughts on administrative law and how the EPA and these various agencies pretty much have run amok on the rules. But I also want to mention to our listeners to please support this radio network. We're in the process to bring up a satellite link which will spread our message all over North America. And we are very close to having that goal. So please support this network and donate money, donate your help to this network, and purchase products from our sponsors. It all helps. It all adds up. Also, I wanted to mention that Debbie Boscalupi's Radioactive Wednesday is on tomorrow at the same time as this radio program, as Connecting the Dots show. And Debbie has a tremendous amount of really important information on her program. She has guests much like mine, and we talk about many of the same things, and her guests are just fantastic. I know Harry Boyens was on a recent program of hers and talking about the plight of the farmers in South Africa, and I think a lot of people are beginning to understand what's happening there. So with that, Jim, I'll get back to you, and let's finish your thoughts. I do want to mention the fact that as Bob says, and as you say, they're continually moving the goalposts. They're not happy with just over-regulating everybody. They continue to move the goalposts on a regular basis to the point where you can't keep up with the law.
Right, and what I think, Bob, what we have, maybe what I want to do is just summarize what happened briefly, and then talk about water as relates to Bob's case, and then maybe apply it. And really, what happened is you had three landmark Supreme Court cases. That's Baltimore Gas and Electric, Chevron, and R versus Robin. And those three cases basically enabled the agencies and emboldened them to take deference and to start making their own laws. And so that's really what we have here is a question of what is law, and I'll get to that in a moment. But so those three cases, Supreme Court cases, emboldened the agencies, and so they began. Now we opened the door now to all of these agencies making all their own rules, to where now we have to sort through what is actually law itself. Dan, that's what we need to do. We need to sort through and ask the question, what is law itself? And I'll define what law is. Law are those statutes that are approved by the House of Representatives and the Senate in the federal case, and then signed by the President. That's what we call law. Courts interpret decisions. They apply tests to the case at hand. And then the executive branch carries out those laws and then fills in the gaps. And there's a lot to that. So the deferences now carried forward throughout time have now enabled the agencies to make all of these rules. And so there's a question out there whether or not they're law. But in Arizona now, I pointed out that House Bill 2238, which was turned into law now, allows the Arizona legislature. It's taking back the function. It's similar to the Congressional Review Act. There's a lot of discussion now on the Congressional Review Act, and in fact, we have a lawsuit, Kansas Natural Resource Coalition versus Zinke. We're suing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to now run a rule through the Congress. We're going to ask the courts to require them to do that. So now we need to have the Congress needs to take back its function, and I think Bob alluded to that. Now, if we turn to the question of what happened with Bob in a summary version, the Clean Water Act has roots in the Rivers and Harbors Appropriations Act of 1899, and that's really Clean Water Act goes back to that. That's the roots, and then there's also Water Pollution Control Act in between, and so we. In that law, in that body of law that was signed by the president and enacted by the Congress, that gave Army Corps of Engineers a very narrow suite of requirements. And then what happened throughout time is we had now agencies wanting to take more jurisdiction, and so we had 3 Supreme Court cases, actually 4. We had the Bayview decision. And the Bayview decision by the Supreme Court is really what opened up the problems we have that Bob is experiencing with wetlands, and that muddled the navigable waterways definition to surface waters, and started ushering in adjacent wetlands. So really, the Bayview decision, Bob, is really where the Army Corps of Engineers started going off the rails. Then we had the solid waste versus Cook County versus U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In that case, though, the Supreme Court actually concluded non-navigable, isolated interstate waters were not subject to clean water jurisdiction. So they really got it right in the SWANA versus Army Corps of Engineers decision. And then we had the Raponis decision that came after that, and that's where they started giving these definitions of significant nexus to navigable waterways. And now we have this arbitrary body of law that culminated in the Duarte decision in 2010, which is taking full advantage of the court-granted authority to take private wetland farming properties, just like Bob's, through administrative cease and desist orders. So that's the decision. There's one more after that. So you have these schizophrenic Supreme Court decisions now that allows U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and EPA is complicit in this, to now do what they want. That's really the problem we have. And so what really needs to happen is we need to sort through, Dan, and I'll end with this, or I'll pause. We need to sort through all of these decisions, and we need to go back to the definition of what constitutes a navigable waterway, which that was defined by the Supreme Court, by the way, already in the late 1800s. We need to redefine for these agencies and pare them down, and we need to give them a wing clipping. So that's what the Congress needs to do, and they're probably not going to do it. So now here is what we're doing, and we're doing it very effectively. We've changed decision-making in 8 federal agencies so far, is mobilizing local governments to now study the statutory law and to come out and to say, no, the statutes don't say that. No, we're not interested in policy manuals. This is what the statutes say, and we're parking on that, and we're going to hold you accountable to it.
You know, Jim, that's a great lead into a further discussion of this, but I have to tell you, one of the problems with the local government aspect of it is finding local governments that aren't so co-opted by all the federal grants and all the money that's coming in from these various federal agencies, and even a lot of NGOs and tax-exempt foundations. So many of them co-opted, and we need to really concentrate on growing backbones in our local governments.
I have a response for that, Bob, and we have an initiative going on in Colorado You're correct, and really what it amounts to is two things: commissioning and fear, conditioning and fear. County commissions have been conditioned that they are the gatekeepers for the federal and the state dole. That's the first. Mm-hmm. Two, they're afraid of saying no for fear that they'll get cut off of the money from number one. And so we have to make a decision as Americans and say, do we want to be beholden to Caesar, or do we want to go with the rule of law, as Bob mentioned earlier, and hold these agents, a higher government, accountable? And it's not only county governments that can do this, Dan. It's also anyone that has taxing authority that can actually hold higher governments accountable. It works. It's very effective, and it's a matter of dusting off the law and applying it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Chance, I want to get you into the conversation too, because you've been writing for 20 years on these various land takings and this very subject. Would you weigh in on what you see as being the biggest problem with these federal agencies, and how you think we could potentially help to change that dynamic?
Writing on that subject for 20 years. I've spoken about it throughout the country and at international conferences as well. And one of the principal things, if not the principal thing, is the pressure that environmental nonprofits are able to put on local agencies. Out here, the ranchers depend on grazing, particularly for summer range, on places like the BLM, the Forest Service, and state-administered lands. I'm sure you're well aware of this and have probably spoken about it on your show, but environmental nonprofit organizations is an extremely lucrative business. They're in it for the money, and they make a lot of money. I've published on it a number of times. But the power that they wield over these agencies is unknown to most of the country and most of the public, but it's considerable. And with that, they have finally gotten to the point where they are essentially able to dictate policy to large federal agencies such as the Forest Service. If they don't like the way something's going, they put enough pressure on them and they sue them. And through utilization of the Equal Access to Justice Act, they're able to make that a lucrative endeavor for them as well. And eventually, what's happened is that they've just knuckled under and given up. I did an article a number of years back with a range called Throwing in the Towel. And that chronicled a landmark case in which we were going before an appellate court. I was the sole expert witness for the federal government. It was a slam dunk case. No reason, no possible way we could have lost it, except the lawyer that was sent out to defend the United States turned out to have been in the pocket of one of these large groups. And she literally and purposely threw the case. There were other Department of Justice very good attorneys that were there, that were local, that I had working relationships and knew the case. They were imploring her. We were passing notes to her during the trial saying, just put Chance on the stand, ask him these questions, just do this. And she refused to do it. She was utterly unprepared. We lost the case. She went back to D.C., and within a couple of months, she resigned and went to work for one of these large environmental nonprofits. I could go on and on about it, but in a nutshell, that is the biggest problem that I see with the federal agencies and they've just been litigated to death. There are people in them that don't want to see this happen. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that the demographic of the actual people in these danger sites has changed significantly over the years, but that's my opinion.
You know, your observations are right on the money. I as a former county commissioner myself, I've seen firsthand how very influential, if not almost instructional, the non-governmental organizations and the tax-exempt foundations are with all of these federal agencies, and they really do have an inordinate amount of power over these agencies because you're right, they play musical chairs. Many of the people who are in the government agencies will go to work for the tax exempts or the NGOs, and vice versa. A lot of the NGOs and tax exempts will literally supply the personnel for many of these agencies. And it's like playing a game of poker where, you know, the other side of the table knows all your cards, and they're passing cards back and forth, and you're there by yourself just trying to play an honest hand of poker. And that's exactly what's been happening with our local governments, with our federal government, and the fact that these non-governmental organizations and tax-exempt foundations are literally raking in billions and billions and billions of dollars. And you're right, the Equal Access to Justice Act has made some of these organizations absolutely filthy rich, because the agencies will actually roll over and give them whatever they want rather than fight this thing out in court, and it's all predetermined. That's the sad state of affairs that our country is facing, but that's the definition of the deep state, and that is exactly why it's so important that people like Bob Brace and families that are standing up, like the Bundys and others around the country, continue to do so. We need to pull the curtain back on this deep state and this incestuous relationship between non-governmental organizations, tax-exempt foundations, UN, incidentally, certified tax-exempt foundations, and what's happening in our own government. Bob, you've been battling this for a long time. You know, I know you know many of these things that we've talked about here. You and I have talked about UN Agenda 21. The fact is there's a lot going on in the background, and that's why American farming and ranching interests are being so directly attacked.
I'd like to go back just for a second on Jim's comment on local government. Our country was founded on local government, and that's where it should be. But as I said earlier, it sure doesn't. We can't sustain it because of subsidies in the federal government. Even you or I or anybody else, just like the liquid fuels, all the townships for the spell, just think they got to have all of that. But then I believe, you know, the chance is 100% right. I mean, to the point that, you know, you or I or any individual, what we have to work with is absolutely nothing. That's why I keep talking about the Constitution. All these things have been put in place. I think they're unconstitutional. I've always said that, and I'll continue to say that. When they come up to you or I, and they have, or Congress has allowed them to fine you or I $100, $150, $200,000 a day with jail time, I mean, there's absolutely nothing. As I said earlier, there's nothing there that a normal person can sustain. You can't do that. And I've told Larry here now, I said, Larry, I said, as we're talking here now, as Chen said, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen because you can be completely innocent. They can still throw the towel in and recapture you and put you in jail. So where are we going? I don't know where we're going, but I told my boys and I told Larry, I said, how am I? I said, I'll never admit to something I didn't do when I've been legal. I'll never admit it. But that's what I'm trying to say to everyone. I'll continue to try to say it. It's so complicated we could talk and talk and talk. But that's what I'm saying. The Constitution's supposed to clarify that. The Constitution, the Fifth Amendment, spells that out. But we don't want to listen to the Fifth Amendment. And that's why I keep saying, when you talk about a republic, we don't have a republic because a republic would not do this to us. So, I'm hoping that everybody continues to understand that. But Ramponis was mentioned. I had some ditches on a farm that I was told, well, you might be okay. But the day that Obama was elected, they came out and said, well, those ditches are streamed because Obama. And he upheld, and they upheld Ramponis. But that's what I'm saying. When you or I or any individual has to go to court to decide, and then every court case is individual. Every court case, they want me or you to decide whether it's jurisdictional. All those things said, I don't know what we got in our jurisdictional determination on land that should have been exclusionary. And that's where you go, back to Chevron deference and back to administrative law. How in the world can you or I, like Jim said, I mean, they're the ones that they make the law, they interpret the law, and they enforce it. So, like I said on my tape, I tried to describe these things 25 years ago. You probably can't even make yourself a proof you're innocent because they won't let you. And these are things I think we as a nation, if we can't recognize that, we're in deep, deep trouble. I already think we are, but again, I don't know. And I told, and I'm saying it, I don't know where we're going to wind up. But I told my attorney, and I'm trying to tell my boys, I said, I don't want to farm. I don't want to work in a country that you can work all your life and go to jail trying to feed somebody. These are the things that bother me immensely. And when we talk about this, and I understand a lot of things that are going on, I probably am more in favor of the environment. When the Cuyahoga River caught on fire, nobody was against this. We all wanted clean water. We all wanted clean air. But our Pennsylvania Constitution says we got to guarantee clean water, clean air, and aesthetic value. We don't have anything in Pennsylvania. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say to everybody on this show. There's nothing or nothing you, when you go to the local level, you cannot get any answer from anybody because the Corps of Engineers and the EPA is the only two agencies out there that we have given authority to. So what's that do? That makes us a communist state in my mind.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right, Bob. And one of the things, we talk about how they've moved the goalposts, but that is exactly what happens in a non-republic, in a totalitarian system, is that they can make the rules as they wish to suit whoever is in power at the time. And that's literally what has been happening in this country, and it's why it's so wrong, and it's why we need to return to what our government and our Constitution was originally intended to do, and that is rule of law, and the rights of the individual are always the very most important thing, and that's what we need to get back to. Jim, we're going to end up in a break here shortly, but let's talk about these deference cases and how we can, as a nation, start to put some sanity back in where we really require that agencies can't make, decide, and implement all their own laws like this. This is just totally unconstitutional.
Love to do that. Would you like to take that after the break, Dan?
Yeah, we better. It sounds like we're moving into the break. Let's pick it up right after the break.
It's the Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and my guests today are Bob Brace, Jim Carlson, and Chance Gowan. And I want to give Jim, I asked you to give us an answer, and then we went immediately into break. So, Jim, I want to give you the opportunity to answer that question. That is, how can we reel in these various groups that are controlling EPA, like groups like that are controlling the legislation, the process, and everything else, because they write the rules, they enforce the rules, and they judge the validity of those rules. So, Jim, go ahead and pick up on that, if you would, please.
Thank you for a broad question, Dan. I think that the first thing we have to do is ask ourselves the question is, what does the law say, the actual statutory law that I alluded to earlier? So that's the first question. We need to understand what the actual law is, what the actual statutes are. And then what we do is we apply them. We find like-minded local authorities, like-kind authority. And this is the key, Dan. You and I have talked about this before, but now we've distilled it down to a soundbite. And that is that we mobilize like-kind local governments to reform higher bad government. And both Chance and Bob and yourself, one of the things that I think is pervasive, and I'm gonna kind of give a different view on this, is the thinking that and the comments that says, you know, the U.S. Forest Service, for example, or Bureau of Land Management, they're all affected by these NGOs, and they certainly do have Marxist thinking in various high levels, and in the organizations and in those bureaus. But I think there's the thinking that says the NGOs have the power, they have the money, and they have all of these things on their side. And what I'd like to say is that the NGOs, once you scratch past the surface and start pushing on them, they cave, they run. They're not used to pushback in a proper way by local organized government that's doing the right thing, that's certain with what they're doing, and folks that have been organized, like they're in Erie, Pennsylvania, for example, that have authority, who are organized in saying no. That's what they're not used to. They're also not, the NGOs, they like us to believe that they're powerful, but they're really, they go home at night, they sit by their swimming pools and do whatever those folks do. But we are resolved, and that's one of the things I point to Bob, and I say, this gentleman is resolved. I'm resolved. Chance is resolved to do the right thing. And so at the end of the day, that's American exceptionalism. The second thing is we have the element of surprise. Now, giving details, Dan, is we organize local government whenever there's an initiative or a problem. The local government responds to that. They study the statutes, and they apply those statutes in a way that and then they study the organizations. For example, in this case, Army Corps of Engineers or Environmental Protection Agency, and we study the organization itself and the weaknesses in those organizations. Who are the people? We ask, who are the people? What in EPA, in Army Corps of Engineers that are making the decisions? And then we apply controlled pain. And what I mean by that, Dan, is that we go before them. We say, this isn't right. These statutes, you are violating these statutes. And here's why you're violating these statutes. We make this case, and then we work our way up. For example, in Army Corps of Engineers, in that apparatus, they're military, and so somewhere in that chain of command is someone who cares, and so we find that person and we put pressure on them in a right way. And I always say that, Dan. You always hear me say this. This is one of my mantras: is that we treat others, even if they disagree with us, with dignity and respect. So we use like-kind authority, we understand the statutes, we organize around the issues, and then we press from the bottom up. And we have, like I said, I've been retained in various capacities to organize and to develop strategies and to orchestrate those strategies in a way that changes decision-making. And it can be done. All is not lost. It can be done appropriately, efficiently, and effectively, because when it comes down to it, we don't have a lot of money. But what we do have is resolve the element of surprise in the law on our side, and it's really a righteous cause when it comes down to it. So how's that for a response, Dan?
Well, I think that's a great response, Jim. One of the things that has always been problematic to me is county commissioners getting local government, getting enough people on board with this idea of returning to a constitutional republic that you'll get enough in numbers that they'll actually make a difference. And that's where programs like this and other programs where we educate people on what the problems really are, and then allow those citizens that are listening to this program, tell them to go talk to your local county officials and tell them this is what we need to do. We need to stand up against this overreach. We need to stand up against these non-governmental groups. And you're right, I know a lot of the people that are in these non-governmental organizations, they're regular people. They're in it for the money. They're in it, and some of them actually believe some of the environmental stuff that's come out of these various organizations. They're not bad people. We need to make ourselves aware and make ourselves follow the rules, that we don't make these people enemies. We just need to make sure they understand what the problems are, and they start listening to what we're saying in return.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
NGOs. This is important for your listeners to contemplate. NGOs are the public. They have no power whatsoever, but they've been utilized effectively not only here but abroad. And really, there now I will mention George Soros and the environmental groups. They've organized them, and they're trying to push NGOs as an authoritative body. They have no authority, and so let's be clear about that. They are just members of the public that are organized, just like associations. But local government does have authority, and that's where the difference is. And we've developed, when I say we now, Kansas Natural Resource Coalition is a coalition of counties that occupies the geographic one-third of the state. We organized in 2013 around a listing of the lesser prairie chicken, which, by the way, Dan is coming back, we're told, to hold U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service accountable for the details, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, RFA, and other laws that burden them, and we were very effective. So for your audiences, that if there's county commissioners or township boards or people that are out there that want to follow this model, we've got a model that works, Dan, and you're aware of it, and you organize, and then you study the statutes, and you actually affect change, and it's very, very powerful because you're using like-kind lower government authority as a check and balance on higher government, and it's effective. We just have to be resolved. We have to apply our rightful authorities. And by the way, that's what the Founding Fathers had intended when they divided the country into 3,028 local governments who have taxing authority on private property and the authority over their boundaries. That's what that's why the Founding Fathers applied at the local level the authorities they did, because they knew that higher government had it right. They had a problem with Britain, and so they knew that higher government has a problem. So that's why they did what they did. We're just pushing it off, Dan.
Dan, can I jump in on that for a second?
Yes, please do, Chance.
So I hear what you're saying, Jim, and I think that functionally what you're saying is correct. But these NGO groups, they do have power, and they have a lot of power that we've seen. And what they do is they'll walk into either a local governmental office or, and like what I deal with, a lot of my clients, a lot of the people I work with have grazing permits, as I said, on state and federal land. And let's take, for example, there's a group out here. It's a medium-sized regional environmental nonprofit called the Center for Biological Diversity. They have on staff 41 attorneys. They're a nonprofit. I've been inside their paperwork. I've been a thorn in their side for years. They walk in and they have tens of millions of liquid dollars in the bank ready to use and say, look, these are our issues. This is what we want to see and this is what we don't want to see. And if you don't make these changes and do this way, and they'll hand out paperwork telling them exactly what they're demanding, we're going to sue you. And then we're going to sue you again. And then we're going to sue you again. And they follow through and do it if they don't get what they want. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, that these agencies at all levels, from the local district all the way to Washington office, have been sued to death, and they just can't take it anymore. I've seen them do the same thing with our local county commissions out here in Idaho, and actually dictate what they want with the threat of litigation and a whole team of attorneys standing behind them. How do you deal with that?
Well, we have a word for that, Chance. It's called intimidation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so what we have to do is to turn, and I know CBD is powerful. We're aware of them. We study the environmental group's model and apply the good things back to them. This is not our first rodeo. What we do works, but what we do is we have to refuse to be intimidated when someone has power, but they're not right.
Can I jump
Well, it's not us that are caving in. My guys are fighting it. We're fighting it. It's the agencies that have decision-making authority over our guys that are just fine. We give up. Let's do this instead. That's our issue.
Well, Chance, I have to interject at this point. I know exactly what you're talking about because I've seen it time after time after time where their intimidation, Jim, they use their intimidation and their lawyers and all the money that they've got behind them. They bring their so-called experts into discussions, and most of these county and local governments just kind of defer to them because most local and county governments don't have the kind of money or the kind of expertise to say, well, that's wrong, that's nonsense, it isn't scientific fact. And so they roll over and they let this stuff happen. And it's important that we understand it's time, as you said, and as Chance and Bob have said, it's time that we start to stand up and say, no more, we're not going to allow this to happen. And you people are on the outside now, and we're going to take over. And that's really what it boils down to. Local governments have to grow a backbone. And that's what I was talking about earlier. We need to make sure we put pressure on through our listeners, through citizen groups. We put pressure on that makes our local governments do the right thing.
Can I step in here now for a minute, Dan?
Sure, Bob.
Yeah, I agree with Chance. I mean, you know, I've been through this, and so many of us have been through it, but as I said earlier, we don't have very much to stand on. I understand how government was formed and how we had all local government should be the way it is. But as these local governments and people have taken federal subsidies and they've lost their control. But Chance, I think, understands, as I think I understand, that when you stand there and try to fight these people, I've got at least $1.5 million. I shouldn't have had the first penny in it. But people are so what do you want to call it, and educated on what is environmental law and what's going on. You know, I said in the first 7 years, if they went to the proper place, they could have found out in 7 hours I was all right. But we have a 1992 newsletter, and the millions and millions and millions of dollars that these groups have, the wildlife people and all these Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, it's not a few dollars, it's millions of dollars. And how do you or I as individuals even begin to fight? And as I've seen all the years I've been, the county commissioners and our local government have lost all the ability to make any difference. And I sent an email out to a group that I'm talking about the other day, as I said earlier. I mean, here we are. You think you have permission. I want to read something to you. I've been going on 32 years with beaver, okay? All right, 32 years, and the last couple, 3 weeks, and they told me this before. They told me that, beaver dams aren't regulated. Well, why do I have this problem? 32 years ago, that's what happened, okay? So Larry and I, we pursued it to take these dams out. We got to do a hydrology study up here. We're supposed to for this jurisdictional stuff we're talking about. We probably got $150,000 in that at least for jurisdictional, as I said earlier. Why are we fighting jurisdictional? Because they want to fight every case individually. So there again, that's what I'm saying. If I win this case, it means absolutely nothing. Then that goes on to the next case. But let me read this. Because they said the beaver dams weren't regulated. They said they're going to work with us, okay? We said, give us a letter. Here's the letter I got. Dear Mr. Brace, I viewed the property on Lane Road, Waterford Township, on May 31st, 2018, and I'm writing to confirm that there is beaver damage that justifies removal of 3 beaver dams and as many beaver as necessary to alleviate damage. The dams are located in a watercourse along a line extending from latitude 41.9764, longitude 80.0418 to latitude 41.9788, longitude 80.0131. The dams may be removed by hand at any time and by mechanical means when a game commission officer is present. Beaver may be removed by trapping or shooting. Persons who are qualified to remove dams or take beaver under this letter are defined in 58 Pennsylvania Code Section 141.3A2. This letter will be effective as of the date mentioned above when I reviewed the property and will remain in effect until December 24th, 18, unless rescinded in writing prior. After this period, I would want to view the property again before I decide if further action continues to meet the Game and Wildlife Code requirements. Last paragraph, I stress, this letter only addresses the legality of removal under the circumstance present and under the Game and Wildlife Code. Nothing in this letter precludes to any other agency from enforcing any other laws of this Commonwealth or the United States that may implement by the proposed removal. Now, I listened to them 32 years ago, and then I listened to them 5 years ago, and they want to set me up again. That's what I'm saying. State, local, federal. None of us have anything because one of my neighbors makes a complaint, and then I'm in trouble. I wouldn't be here, but I had a complaint. That's administrative law. And you or I as citizens, and I know stewards of the range talked about local government. I talk about it all the time. That's where it should be. That's our problem. We don't have it, and we're losing. We've lost big time. And what I think we're trying to make known today is that the local farmers and ranchers are put up in a very, very difficult situation when you can't graze your land, you can't have water you was given to 100 years ago or whatever it was, and you can't do something more than 3 or 4 or 5 years without having it recaptured. These are major problems. And we talk about statutes and things that we're never going to understand. That's why the Constitution, again, comes in. The Fifth Amendment, they want it, they paid for it. Whether that means anything, I don't know. It doesn't to me because they haven't done it. Vicki Poe's guy talked to her this morning. Her dad, I feel bad every time I look at our tapes. Her dad, a Hungarian immigrant, been dead for 10 years. And what are they? They're still after Vicki and their family to remove the dirt. Now, come on. What are we talking about? We need a complete change. We need a president that understands what we're talking about here today. And we can talk back and forth forever. It's not going to go any good unless President Trump and someone, Pruitt, and the people that are there to understand what we're talking about today. But when we talk about how we're going to do it, there's only one way to do it. That's Congress. Congress is the only one that can rescind these things. And when I or you are fined and are able to be fined those kind of figures every day, it's terrible. My second enforcement action, they want $595,000. They say that's cheap because the government allowed them for each one of these violations that they told me I could do. There's 3 of them. They said they could fine me for 700 and some days, $29 million some odd dollars for each one of them. These are the kind of things we're facing. And, you know, I mean, the talk, I understand the local control level, but I agree with Chance. They got so many dollars, and if you look at our 92 newsletter, I mean, we're in trouble, bad trouble, and we don't have more time to figure it out. If we don't get this administration, I don't think our country's going to survive. That's my opinion. I wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, well, Bob, you're right, and I agree that our really last best hope is the Trump administration, and that they will start to roll back all these things. I want our listeners to understand one thing. There was no such thing as a non-governmental organization prior to the 1950s. That is a creation of the UN, and they were originally intended to be all certified by the UN as non-governmental organizations, and it says right in the wordage, the mandate of the UN, that non-governmental organizations will be used as groups that achieve social change through their various efforts. That's exactly what NGOs are. It's time that we put an end to the power of non-governmental organizations, and it's time that we end the tax exemption of tax-exempt foundations. It may hurt some of the people out there that have good foundations and good non-governmental organizations, but we're going to have to get rid of the whole bunch if we're going to get rid of these wolves in sheep's clothing. Jim,
Here, I agree with
heard
you
all
totally.
This stuff. Let's see what you've got to say.
Pardon?
Jim, I want you to respond, because you've heard what we think about non-governmental organizations and the fact that they do have an awful lot of power, even though they're not supposed to. I hear what you're saying, but we have to face the reality. They've got a lot of money and a lot of power behind them. How can we effectively put an end to that?
Well, I want to share that I'm sensitive to what Chance has offered and what Bob has offered as well. I'm sensitive to that. I understand the position, and I think that in one sense you're right. But the real question that I bring forward is why are we afraid? And I think looking at reality is one thing, but the other thing is to say what can I do? What can we do that's effective, that's wise, and a wise use of resources, and that makes a difference. And so what I was doing is I was sharing in a positive way how we have affected change in 6 or 8 federal agencies. One of them was the Bears Ears Monument Reduction. I had my hands in that. There was the Duluth Mineral Complex in northern Minnesota. We were part of that. So these are not small things. I'm not sharing theory. I'm sharing. I'm actually applying, in a way, applying judicial use of statutes and money and local control. But to respond to your directly to your question, Dan, here's an idea for your listeners. Is George Soros came from Hungary. He immigrated from Hungary, if you remember, and his NGOs have been putting pressure on Hungary, as they have been throughout all the EU countries. And just a few weeks ago, the Soros Foundations quit Hungary amid political hostility. Hungary ran them off. And so what we need to do is go ask Hungary and study that model, and then bring that back here and apply it and run off the NGOs. So are those big words? They certainly are. But the question is you have to start somewhere. You have to take an assessment of your resources, look at your resolve, and you have to start somewhere.
We have started with our Constitution. I hear that, George Soros, I mean, good almighty. I mean, the guy, I don't know how we can think that way, but people have been going through this. Like I said, I talked to Vicky Poe's guy this morning, and I know O.C. Mills is dead. You know, and these are the people that run through the mill, and how can we keep doing that? I mean, the Missouri farmers, the ranchers, the Pundys, the Wayne Haig, I mean, Helen Chenoweth, all those people that fought and tried to make a difference. And what do? They say, well, you can't because it's abandoned. We take your permit away. I mean, we got to do something drastic. We can't continue to go back and make a model or try to make something work that hasn't worked and won't work. In my mind, I'm desperate here. I am desperate to make something understood. And, you know, and I believe and I hope that Trump meant what he said when he was elected. I think you talk about foundations. We had a 501c3 and 6 in here, and Larry had a 6 too, I think. But again, in 2006, after our trial in Washington, D.C., they said, well, anybody that was taking $25,000 to $50,000 a year, we're going to investigate them. They've been under the conservative group here for years and years and years. But, you know, I keep saying these things because we've tried. We continue to try. But I keep making the remark, I'm done trying to farm or trying to do anything out here. If we're guilty, you can go to jail for everything we're doing, and that's what it is. Administrative law can put me in jail for everything. And I try to do a good job. We've tried to do a good job. We've tried to make people understand. And that's why I took this stand now. And you think it's easy to stand here and lose everything you've ever worked for? That's where we're at. I mean, this is exactly where we're at. And Chance knows that. I know that. And everybody else should understand that that's a terrible situation to be put into when you don't have constitutional rights. Jimmy Hayes and Commerce and Ridge, that was about 1330. My wife and I, my daughter, we lobbied in Washington for 5 years for a takings issue. You know, and that's when Tom was on our side. But again, if you look at the 92 newsletter, the environmentalists got so strong with so much money. And like Chen said, sue, that's all they can do. And you or I as individuals, how do we do? That's why everybody's knuckling over. And there's no reason to stand there. Everybody says you're crazy for standing here. I got to keep saying these things because this is no party no more. The party's over with. And, you know, China has a plan, and it sure isn't the world order plan. And these are things that people got to start to understand. Our country's so far in debt that everybody thinks that we can't go broke. We've already been broke. I mean, these are things that these issues are causing us major problems. And I got to keep trying to say these things because, I mean, I tried what you guys are talking or what we're trying about. We had an organization there, the Pennsylvania landowners.
Bob,
we had every person in this country on our Supreme Court. Every one. The realtors, the coal people, and every.
This is The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing our freedom in the land.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Hathel. And today my guests are Bob Brace, Jim Carlson, and Chance Gowan. And we are talking now about how rural America is literally getting screwed by all the different regulations and all the non-governmental groups that are controlling so much of what's happening in our country. I have to tell our listeners that one of the things that we have to really understand, both sides of this issue are absolutely right. Jim, I know that you think we can handle a lot of stuff by using the laws that these people have created against them because they are really running rampant over everyone by utilizing, let's say, non-existent administrative rules, regulations, and laws that they create as they go. The one thing that I would have to tell our listeners is that I think the real answer to this is in the number. We are educating, we are finally getting the word out to enough people where I believe that we are going to have the power of the people behind us, because they are starting to realize that this is not some little local issue. This is not something that can be handled with soft pedal. This is a national crisis of the highest magnitude that have destroyed our rights to private property and our control of our own lives, and that is what the deep state is all about. Bob, I'm going to get back into letting you finish your thoughts there. I do want to remind our listeners that Debbie Boscalupi's Radioactive Wednesday will be on tomorrow morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific time, and also that Jeff Bennett's Life, Liberty, and all that jazz follows up our show today, and he has a terrific program that is on from Tuesday through Friday. So please tune in both those shows and all of our other thing that's on this network, and please support this network. It's very important that we do what's necessary to make this word get out to millions and millions of people all over North America. So, Bob, I'm going to turn it back to you. I had to cut you off, but you're absolutely right. I know your frustration because you've spent 32 years battling the beast, but I do believe that we are at a point where one of two things is going to happen. We're going to lose this war, or we're going to win this war. I think we are at a critical tipping point now, and I think we have enough people waking up that maybe we can do what Jim's talking about and get pressure on local governments and on people to do the right thing for a change. But go ahead, finish your thoughts, please, Bob.
Well, again, like I said, we tried, and I've tried. We've tried to educate so many different ways, and we had a lot of people listening to us, but as people do, they follow money, and that's what Chance has said here before. I mean, they're loaded with money. I mean, if you go, and I hope you do, you hope you look at that newsletter in 1992. It's on our website. But I mean, back then, the Fish and Wildlife people, and those people were making the people there were making $200,000 a year back then, and again, it's just a situation where the Fish and Wildlife people, they kept saying they didn't have no power, they can't do this, they can't do that. But the Food Security Act of '85 gives them the power to go in there and tell the agencies what they wanted or didn't want. But what they didn't tell them was that they pretty much regulated the whole show. But these are things that I think that, that Congress has allowed these things to happen, as I keep saying. I have talked with C.T. Thompson on the Farm Bill. He's indicated, he's continuing to indicate, like he's put in his quotes there on Chris Bennett's show. And these are things that to try to get them to follow through with, I've continued to try. But I believe, Jim, I think you said you're in Arizona? Jim?
I'm in Kansas.
Tim Walters, he had written there and years ago. I mean, he did a lot of publications on the West. And, again, these are things that we as people, I mean, we got to understand that we're way, way out of line here. And like the world order we're talking about in the 60s there, and put all this stuff together, it didn't give us much what do you want to say, much effort for the United States to succeed, giving all our rights away pretty much, and how you want to through it, say we got a right to sue. Well, again, you or I as individuals, how do we sue? You can. But I went into this, and I told Larry, I said, I want it all out here. Now it's out there. There's 3,200 pages, and this is a show that the Justice Department has continued to hammer away at us, and every time we do something, they go back to the judge. I mean, it's unbearable. But, I don't know where it's going to end up. But like I just said and trying to say here today, I mean, we're at a tipping point, and if we can't get this message to Congress and to Pruitt and to Mr. Trump and to the people that are running this, Mr. Sessions, and whoever can make a comment and get this straightened out. I told Vicki this morning. Vicki told me how they're overrun. I mean, they're just overrun with this stuff, and who would think? I mean, I don't know why in the world they'd want to go back on the kids, but that's what I told my family. If we lose or I die before this is settled, they're bound and determined to do away with us, just like the Bundys and just like Wayne Haig and all those people that fought. And, you know, Stewards of the Range, they were big on local government. I am too, but I haven't been successful in making it work. You know, I keep saying that's what I said a few minutes ago. You know, you get what you think is control to do something, and then someone makes the complaint, and then you're up against millions of dollars in fines and penalties, and who can stand there? I mean, I've had different Amish people say, do we have any rights anymore? I said, not many. They're wanting 600,000 acres out of Lancaster area down there, and they don't plan on paying for it. That's the whole thing, is compensation, the Fifth Amendment, and I've had different people say, that'll never happen. Well, when I started in this whole fight, you know, and when I built my house and did this talking when I started, our country didn't owe $1 trillion. Now they're, what, $21 trillion? And here again, how many? A couple of $100 trillion of unfunded mandates. And I read that article this morning, the guy that said our country can't go broke. Read Bernie Sanders' website. We're already broke. And how are the people going to pay it? I don't know, but I got to keep throwing these things in because we're coming to the end of the line, and don't think we're not. I mean, I know the people, all the people that if you get on our website, I've lobbied with them, I've worked with them, you know, and again, the McGowans, all the people that are on there, and I hope you look at this because the call to action part 1 and the call to action part 2, that's what we're talking, and the examples are there, you know, and so it's not like we've just started. I told Larry, I said, this office up here is full of so much information on property rights, it's pathetic. But my grandmother came here from the Ukraine in 1907 for these same reasons, when they were starving the Russians and the Ukrainians. I mean, these are things that they're serious things. When you don't have constitutional rights no more, what happened to republic? All the things we're saying and talking about, everybody's a nation has to understand, like Dan is trying to get the message out. We have to keep trying now. But with that said, all the information, if you want, and I hope you do, I got a video on PA landowners. That website is mentioned there in Chris's article. But between Larry's and mine and Chris Bennett's websites, I'm afraid there's more there than anybody's going to be able to look at this year or next year probably too. But with that said, you can go ahead and ask any other thing you want to try. I'll try to do it, or whoever does. But I've tried so hard, and we all have. And like I said, and again, we had a coalition on our search at the Supreme Court. Every American Farm Bureau, all the local farm bureaus, the Realtors Association, the Builders Association, and then again, when they didn't review it, wouldn't take it. Of course, again, that's like getting struck by lightning to try to get into the Supreme Court. But these are things that people say, if you don't like the law, change it. Well, we've been trying to change things I've been trying to change it for 35 years, and many people have called me crazy, and I guess maybe I have been. I hope not, but it's beginning to look more like it every day, because we can't wait for more models. We got to try to get under the Constitution of the United States and have.
Bob, I have to tell you, one of the things that stands out to me is that you have been in this battle for 32 years. You were probably one of the earlier ones to get started in the battle. And I think a lot of our listeners and a lot of people in this country have really not understood just exactly how few of our rights remain under our Constitution, and how we have had a sea change in the whole attitude of government and in the whole attitude of private property. And that's all happened really since 1976. When you started this battle was about the time that the FLTMA and all these different the EPA, all these federal agencies and all these different things were really getting started. And it was part of a bigger plan to create a global government. Now, you say that you've almost run out of options on this stuff. Bob, hang in there, buddy, because the reality is, I believe we will win this battle, because people are finally, for the first time in my lifetime, finally starting to wake up, and it looks to me like there is a chance to turn this ship around. Bob, well, I want to get Chance. I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this, because you've been science editor for Range Magazine for 20 years. You've seen a tremendous change in the whole attitude in this country. Tell Jim how you think the farming and ranching community and organizations, magazines like Range and all these other groups can start working together, because our strength is in numbers. Our strength is in waking people up and enlisting help from a lot of people, because if we can get the people behind us, we can make this thing work.
Okay, let me take a stab at that. One of the things that we've noticed that I think is actually a very positive sign, and speaks to what you've been saying, Dan, is that 20 years ago, Range has been around roughly 25 years, and I did my first story for the magazine back about 97 or something like that. It was primarily an agriculturally based magazine. It dealt almost exclusively with ranchers and farmers, but it was pretty much a cowboy magazine. Over the years, that's begun to change, and as the distribution has increased, over half of our readership now are urban. And that shows that there are people in these urban environments that are starting to realize what's going on. And so the discussion we've been having here is supported by that people are beginning to wake up. They're going to places like Range Magazine and reading what's happening and going, geez, I didn't really realize this was happening. And so I think that's a positive thing. But one of the issues that I see on a regular basis, and is exemplary of why we've gotten ourselves in this big hole, is the disparity between the bulk of people that live in the urban environment and those of us that live in rural environments. We've become so separated and so disassociated with each other that they can no longer relate. Let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I got a phone call from the Aggregate Producers Association back in Wisconsin. And they said, gee, Chance, we've been reading your articles, and we were wondering if you'd come out here and speak. And I said, who is this again? And they said, well, we're the Aggregate Producers Association. And I said, you mean rocks? And they said, well, yeah. And I said, you guys, I'm a biologist. I work on cattle ranches. And they said, well, yeah, we understand that, but I think you don't realize that we're facing a lot of very similar issues out here. And I just couldn't imagine what they were facing and how it could be similar. But the fact was, what they were facing was exactly what Jim has been talking about, only on a different level, in that these NCOs are coming in and actually paying for elections and putting people on local governments so that they can get in and carry their message. As you or Jim alluded to earlier, they're being sent to colleges and their tuition being paid and being placed in government and state agencies to carry this cause. And to wrap it up, I think the way they're getting away with it, and what I alluded to begin with, is that when I go to an urban area, you hear jokes about people picking up a steak in the store and not really recognizing where it came from. That is really a true thing. There is so much separation between where our food and where our production and where our natural resources are between those that live in these isolated little bubbles, that they really don't know that steak they pick up, they probably know in their deep subconscious. I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm just saying they no longer think of it in that way, that steak 10 days ago was a steer walking around. And so when one of these NCO groups comes in with a slick and glossy presentation and says, oh, look at all these horrible things, then it doesn't matter if it's some guy digging rocks out of the ground, or it's a farmer trying to grow corn, or it's one of my ranchers with a cow standing in a stream. It's all the same money-making mechanism for these NCOs. And when they show these pictures and say all these terrible things are happening, write us a check and we'll fight it, they write them the checks. but they don't realize that the things that they depend on every day that are at their grocery shelves or the clothes on their backs come from these very people that they're writing money to fight. And I think that's an area where we really need to make an effort and present the opposite side of the story to people that are living in isolation away from it.
Chance, you're right on the money with that, because that's exactly what we're trying to do with radio programs like this. But you're right. I mean, we saw that during the election. People, elitists like Hillary Clinton, talking about flyover country. Well, literally, they see the East Coast and the West Coast as being the only important areas. Yes, the Midwest and the middle of the country, with the exception of a few big cities, are to them just flyover country. It is like we almost don't exist. And I guess that's why it's so important that we educate, because people need to understand that without flyover country, they can't survive.
Absolutely. And it's almost inconceivable for me to even believe, and I'm associated with it all of the time, but what I was saying is really true. When I speak in front of a big group and it's in a suburban area and we pull in some of these urban residents, the questions I'm asked are just incomprehensible because they've just lost touch. And that's why these NCOs are able to get away with it, because they can present one side of an issue and the other side isn't there, it isn't being presented. And if you're good at what you do, you can make mom and apple pie look like a terrible thing. And these guys are good at what they do.
They are good at what they do, and I have a perfect example of it. A friend of mine, Michael Shaw, in Santa Cruz, California, sent me a flyer where they, I believe it was the NRDC, it was one of those groups, was raising money, and they had pictures of the poor buffalo in Yellowstone and how the people in Montana were trying to destroy the buffalo, and please contribute your money. And they end up, those flyers and those mailers or whatever, end up in coffee shops on the East Coast and the left coast, and that's where they target those, because people don't have a clue what they're doing, and everybody knows they love the environment. They don't realize that farmers and ranchers are the biggest protectors of the environment because our livelihoods depend on it. And believe me, the people in the cities have no idea what good environmental stewardship is about. They have no clue. So it's important that we do educate people. And Chance, you're right on the money. The only way we're going to do that is continuing to do what we're doing right here, right now, today, and that is educate people on the facts, on the realities. Jim, I want to give you just a few minutes toward the end of the show here. We're about running out of time to give your website so that people can contact you. And then I want to get Bob and Chance also, give them an opportunity to plug their organizations and their ideas as well. So can you give it about a 30-minute talk on where they can reach you?
Right. How about if I confine it to 30 seconds?
Sounds good.
That'll be Kansas Natural Resource Coalition, and I can be reached there, and my email address is jcarlson@knrc.org. I'm the executive director of the Kansas Natural Resource Coalition, and then you could also reach me. I also pay the bills as a consultant, and that's jcarlson@wbsnet.org. And I want to. I'll leave with this, Dan. Is that I share the sense of urgency of Bob, and I also share the direness of Chance and Bob both collectively, and the importance of the Constitution. I think this discussion was, Dan, is how we get there, how we arrive at it. And I've elected to take the long road to work up through the process appropriately, rightly, and we have a program that's working. And so that's what I was sharing with your group. So I'm not insensitive at all to the immediate needs. I do think education is important, but I think more importantly is you work with who you have, because there's a lot of people that are educated that are doing nothing. And so I think you work with what you have in front of you, and you put the plow on the ground and you pull the plow, no matter how bad it looks. So that's my philosophy. Thank you, Dan, for including me on the program.
Oh, you bet. And we really appreciate your input, and I certainly know you are a patriot first class. There's no doubt about it. Bob, very quickly, tell people about your website and the information that you want people to check out on your website.
Well, you can go to www.palandowners.org, go to Bob Bray's case, and there's a 28-minute video there, and then you can go and call to action part 1 and call to action part 2, and you can see the examples made throughout the country for the last 25 to 30 years. And again, I want to read a paragraph out of Range magazine here. It's just a short one. I think and I hope that what it says, at first the Swamp Buster Act was not strictly enforced in the state until green groups sued the South Dakota NRCS to demand compliance. These groups have no vested interest in the property but are accepted as NGOs from non-governmental organizations, stakeholders of decision-making. And that's kind of what I believe Jim is saying, that these people have all kinds of power and we have nothing. But I just wanted to throw that in there. And thank you very much for being able to participate. And
you're quite welcome, Bob, and hang in and stay in the fight, because you're doing the right thing. There's no question. Chance, I want to give you a minute just to tell people about Range Magazine and what you're doing.
Sure, thank you. If you're interested in Range Magazine, you can call 800-RANGE-4-U, or just go online and type in rangemagazine.com. If you're interested, let them know. They'll send you a sample copy for free. It's a good magazine. It is dedicated to the cause. Nobody's getting rich off of this magazine. It's a lot of people working very hard because they think this is very important. And C.J. Hadley, the editor, is a wonderful person who is in this heart and soul. To contact me, I'm a consulting biologist principally on cattle ranches throughout the West. You can contact me at cowboyways_chance@yahoo.com, or I can be contacted at any time through Range. I'm also available for some limited speaking engagements. I want to thank both of the guests, and Dan, you especially, for being on here and giving me the opportunity. This is a big issue, and if we don't turn the corner now, we're not going to. I certainly am in agreement with you guys on that, and I hope through these efforts we're able to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Chance, and you're right. I mean, we have very, very few options left, and we need to do this the right way, but we need to do it by enlisting people and enlisting local governments to grow a backbone, to grow a brain, to get involved, to understand their constitutional responsibility is to protect the lives, liberty, and property of the people within their jurisdiction. And their obligation is not to play Santa Claus and to get reelected by giving away government goodies. That is not what they're all about. They are about life, liberty, and property, and it's time they figure that out. I thank our listeners, I thank our guests, and please join us again next week for Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and I look forward to the next week. Thank you.